Take a look at the field. You can see I got some rain. Maybe it rained a couple of inches. Maybe I got about 2 inches of rain, about 1.5 inches of rain. And right now I got a I got a sick calf. I got a calf that's over there. He kind of teetering back and forth. He's kind of going from being looking like he's kind of doing okay to kind of going backwards to kind of doing okay to kind of going backwards. And I was over there, and this calf, I've actually worked on him so much that he'll actually let me walk up to him and pet him on the back. He won't run away. And he's also kind of weak, and so I can just grab a hold of the calf and give him a shot. And so this morning I was taking a look at him, and I was right there next to him, and I was taking a look at him, and he is gasping. He's gasping pretty hard. His lungs sound pretty bad. And and he's kind of starting to wobble. He's starting to wobble. And so the whole thing, I've talked about the wobble, is that when the animals, when they start to wobble, it's usually because they're not having enough, they don't have enough energy, and that has to do with their diet. And so the animal is not eating enough to sustain himself. His energy reserves are depleting, and he's kind of teetering back and forth between kind of looking like he's doing better and kind of looking like he's not doing okay. And so this morning I got a hold of him and I gave him a shot of macrocin. So I did go ahead and give him another shot of antibiotics. And as of as of this point, he's gotten everything. He's gotten tenatril, he's gotten enrofloxacin, he's gotten florfenicol, he's gotten Zactran, and he's gotten a shot of macrocin, and he's had 2 shots of Banamine. And so I did everything that I could for the calf. And he's standing at the feed bunk, but I didn't know, or she, excuse me, but she's not really eating. All right, she's not really eating. For her to get better, she's gonna have to start eating a large amount of food so that she can start developing that energy reserve, and her immune system can start to kick in. But she's not eating. All right, and so she's not eating very much. And so I do have a sick calf over there. And that's, it is what it is. I got another sick calf over there, okay? And the other animal that she always hangs out with that other animal. I was saying I got two kind of sick calves, and I have a third calf that's kind of thin. The 2 sick calves, her and another calf, they, I've effectively always just had them kind of together because they've always gotten their shots together. And so she's always hanging out with that other calf, and that other calf has a little bit of a droopy ear. And so I went ahead and gave her a shot of a macrocin as well. All right, and so but here are the other cattle right now, and so I got those calves over there, and 1 or 2 of them, one of them is pretty severely ill, but I'm not going to say the calf is kind of teetering back and forth. Okay, the calf is kind of looking like they're doing okay, and then they're kind of not doing okay, and then they're kind of doing okay, and they're kind of not doing okay. And so this morning I went ahead and gave them a shot of macrocin. I gave them both a shot of macrocin. And here are the other cattle. This is what I call the stabilized herd, right? This is what I call the stabilized herd. These animals are all effectively stable, and they're all going up in value. And I have 31 animals out here. Pretty soon I'll start liquidating some of these animals. And I was actually taking a look at this last night. And I checked everything over and over and over again. Before I say this, I just, I want to say that, I'm not saying this to float my own boat. I'm not saying this to brag. I'm just saying, I took a look at it last night, because these cattle, they were at the lease property, right? These cattle, they were at the lease property. And so I didn't really get a hard look at the animals. I didn't really sit there and get a hard look at the animals. And when I brought them home, yesterday night, I was actually taking a hard look at these animals. And I would say that I'm actually doing about 10 to 15% better than I thought. All right, I'm probably doing about 10 or 15% better than I thought. All right, I made sure to, objectively take a look at everything. All right, I thoroughly checked, and I'm taking a look at it, and I am doing about 10 to 15% better than I anticipated. These animals, they're going to produce, I'm actually going to make more money on these animals than I did on the You know, these animals, they're going to hit the scale harder, okay? Long story short, they're going to hit the scales harder, all right? They're going to hit the scales real heavy. You know, I've been talking about, I'm looking to start liquidating animals in about 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks. And the reason that I'll start liquidating animals in 3 to 4 weeks is because I'm looking to get everything, you know, get all the eggs in a row, right? I want to get the, you know, I'm still, those calves in the preconditioning pen, they still need to get stabilized. They still need to be stabilized. And by the time I stabilize those animals, right, because those animals getting stabilized is effectively the main priority, right? That's the main to-do thing right now, is to get the animals in the preconditioning pen stabilized, because once they are stabilized, they will effectively, you know, I can add to them, right? That's the whole thing, is because these animals, they're already too big. They're already too big. You know, I'm not going to go to the sale barn and start buying, you know, 500-pound cattle, okay? You know, I don't really want to do that. Can I do that? I can, but then, you know, I don't really want to do that, okay? You know, I really want to buy them a little bit lighter. I want to buy them at about 250, all right? And so the whole big picture idea of what am I looking to accomplish is effectively, you know, I'm stabilizing the animals, and once I have them stabilized, I will start liquidating these animals. And that's the whole idea of how do I purchase more assets, right? How do I expand the size of my business? There are two major ways that I expand my business, right? Number one is reinvest the capital that my business makes, right? When I sell these cattle, I will make money. I will make a large amount of money. I take the profits, I reinvest them back into my business. And number two is I take a look at my balance sheet. I appraise my balance sheet, determine how much leverage do I have on my balance sheet, and if the leverage is low, I can even leverage against my animals, right? That's how I expand my business, right? You know, that's how I expand my business, right? That's how I do it, word for word. Legitimately, I'm not lying about it. I'm telling you the truth. That's how I do it. I take the profits of my business and then I reinvest them. My business makes whatever, $25,000 a month, and I have a net positive equity evaluation on my herd of $15,000. Right? I anticipate that I make roughly $500,000 a year, $40,000 a month. So I take a look at my situation, right? And you know, and I was talking about this, I've been talking about this for a couple of days. You know, the whole thing is, if I take the money that I make, right? Let's say I take my 25 grand that I pay myself. Let's say I take the 20 grand that I pay myself and I put it back into my business. What does that look like with no leverage? That looks like me selling 10 animals, taking the money and buying 20. That's what it looks like, right? Long story short, that's what it is, right? And when I leverage, you know, and granted, if I have 2 or 3 animals die, then I stabilize my asset first, then I leverage against it. Right? And, you know, if I do not use leverage and I start liquidating animals and I start putting the money back into my business, all I do is reinvest the capital. The percentage of debt that I have on my balance sheet in relation to the appraisal value of my assets will start to fall. And another way to take a look at this is, if I have 45 animals, and I would anticipate that over the next 3 months, I end up selling 30 of them. If I sell the 30 animals and I make enough money to buy 55, I go to the sell barn and I buy 55. I now have 70 animals, right? I now have 70 animals, but I have not used any debt. I have not used any debt, but I have expanded the size of my business by about, 45%, 40%. So in this situation, the amount of debt that I have on my balance sheet will fall, right, in terms of a percentage to my overall appraisal, right, to the overall value of the herd. Right? It's very simple, right? If I have an XYZ amount of debt, if I have an X amount of debt, and I expand my balance sheet by 40%, and I still have an X amount of debt, then the amount of debt that I have in relation to my overall balance sheet will fall, right? And at that point, I would go and I would take more leverage, right? I would take more leverage. That's how I grow my business, right? And when you take a look at my business, I grew my business by over 1,000% doing this in the last 2.5 years. And I would anticipate that I grow my business by more than 200% in the next 6 months. I would reasonably anticipate, if everything just goes okay, I will manage to do it. All right, that's effectively, and that is how I did it. All right, nobody cares about an opinion. All right, nobody cares about an opinion. I actually do this stuff in real life, and that is how I did it. I take the money that my business makes and I put it back into my business. All right, I put it back into my business. When I do that, I have a balance sheet. The balance sheet has an appraisal value. I leverage against that value. That when I do that, my business grows. All right, and the whole thing about the whole thing about this whole situation about running a business, and the whole thing about this, and I was actually thinking about this earlier today. But okay, the whole thing about in terms of generating I effectively generate enough money to do anything on the planet, right? Just about. And then I was actually thinking about, like, what if I just, what if I just, but here's the thing, and I know that this is going to sound ridiculous, and it's going to sound whatever, but it is what it is. And, first world problems, okay? And, and the whole idea of investing, and I'm not going to say it's a first world problem, I'm going to take it from a different perspective. I will give you my perspectives on how I see capital, on how I see money. All right, I will give you my perspective on how I see it. And in terms of what do I mean by, spending money, the idea of spending money, consumerism, the idea of spending money is a waste of time. There is no reason to think about spending money. This is something that I have logically deduced from my situation. The only thing that reasonably makes sense to think about when it comes to money is where to invest the money. That's it. Where should I invest my capital, and what kind of a return should I get? Because here's the thing. Let's say that I do what I say I'm gonna do, right? Let's just say that I do it. I've already said this is exactly what I'm looking to do. I have 31 animals here, and over the next 3 months, I would reasonably anticipate that I liquidate 30 of them. I liquidate these animals over the next 3 months, okay? They're all effectively stabilized. They're gaining weight very well. I'm actually doing about 10 or 15% better than I anticipated. All right, I'm doing about 10 or 15% better than I anticipated. These animals are going to make me more money per head than my last set of animals did, and it's going to be probably by about 10 or 15%. And so let's just say I do what I say I'm going to do, right? Let's just say I do what I'm going to say I'm going to. Let's just say I do what I'm going to say I'm going to do, right? And so right now, and I said, you know what? I'm just going to take 1 month worth of money, and I'm going to go and spend it. And no matter what, I will spend 1 month worth of money. Here's the thing, and let's just say that I grow my business. So today I would have to go and spend $40,000. Legitimately just spend it on whatever I would have to spend $40,000 to use 8% of my income. All right, I would have to spend like 40 grand to use 7.5% of my income. And let's just say that I do what I say I'm going to do, and I actually grow my business. Right, I've already said this is exactly what I'm looking to do, and let's just say I do it, right? And let's just say that I do it over the next 3 months, and I maintain this. I'm going to use 1 month worth of money. In 3 months, I would have to use another $40,000. How do you even spend $80,000? Right? I mean, logically, you can't. And if I was intentionally going to do this, and I said, you know what, I will always put away 1 month worth of money for me to go and buy whatever I want, then I can leverage the money. Right? Then I can leverage the money. What could I even, if I had to intention, and here's the thing, I will probably grow my business even more. I probably will. All right, I haven't really thought, I haven't really, planned it out, but the direction that I am going, I will probably grow my business even more. I probably will, okay? And, and it's like, even right now today, if I was going to use 1 month worth of the money that I make, I would have to spend $40,000. And let's just say that over the next 3 months, I do what I say I'm going to do, and I go ahead and I do it. Then I double the size of my business. That means in 3 months, I would have to spend another $40,000. All right, and then, and here's the thing, and if that happens, by the time I spent the $80,000, it would be a new year, and I would have to budget another $80,000 to spend. So, this is also what I mean by after a certain point, the money does not do anything. All right, granted that I don't become an idiot, and one of the, and the big benefit of making such a large amount of money, from what I have seen, because the whole thing is that, I actually made it, right? I actually did it. And, I am currently at a point where I don't even have to worry about money. I don't worry about money. It's whatever, right? Even if I decided that I was going to give up on the cattle business and I just liquidated all of my assets and I just put all the money in the S&P 500 and I went to go fry chicken at Wingstop, I would still effectively make enough money to buy anything on the entire planet. That's the situation that I'm in, right? Granted that I don't start doing drugs, it won't matter. Granted that I don't start drinking all the time, it won't matter. Granted that I don't become an idiot, it won't matter. Legitimately, I make a tremendous amount of money, right? I effectively make more money, drastically more money than anybody on the planet. All right, and it is what it is, all right? I mean, I've taken a look at it. I understand what it is. I'm not saying that to be a prick. I'm just saying, I actually managed to do something for myself. And when you take a look at what I'm doing, I mean, we're effectively talking about a 0.0000001%. I may legitimately be one of maybe not even 3 people on the entire planet that can legitimately do something like this. Legitimately. I mean, I may only be one of, it might not even be 3. I might be the only one. All right, and in terms of a realistic sense, I legitimately make enough money to buy anything on the planet. And the whole thing about this is that, I'm in the cattle business, right? Cattle are a commodity, and it's even if I lost this farm, it doesn't matter. Which I wouldn't. I mean, I'm not anywhere, I don't put myself anywhere near bankruptcy, right? I talk about this I do all the time. How do I, not go into the negative, right? I invest my capital first. Like when I sell these animals and I make the money, I invest that money first. I buy assets at their appraisal value. I raise them to beyond a commercial standard effectively, right? I raise them very well. And then once I have the assets stabilized, I leverage against them, right? And I always keep my balance sheet under 100% leverage. Realistically, I keep, as of today, I'm leveraged probably about 75%. My leverage is probably about 70%, 75%, something like that. I wouldn't take any more leverage at this point. I wouldn't. But as time progresses, the amount of leverage that I have on my balance sheet will begin to drop because the stabilized herd is going up in value. So maybe next month I have enough equity on my balance sheet to leverage for another 5 animals if I felt like doing that. If I felt, but then again, in all honesty, next month I'll be selling 10 animals, right? And if I sell 10 animals, I'll probably make enough money to buy 20. And if I do that, now we're talking about the leverage on my balance sheet is falling drastically, right? And so it won't matter, all right? It doesn't matter, it is what it is, that's how I did it, all right? That's how I did it. I've taken a look at it, and I am doing about 10 to 15% better than I thought, all right? I am doing about 10 to 15% better than I thought. I didn't really get to take a hard look at my animals because they were over on the lease property, but, last night I took a hard look at them. I took a real hard look at them, and I'm doing well. I'm doing very well in terms of I'm doing very well in terms of the bigger, broader picture idea. I'm doing very well for myself. These animals, they're gonna hit the scales really hard. Okay, they're gonna hit the scales really hard. And then they're gonna make some good money. Okay, I'm gonna make some good money on these animals. And, when I take the money and, I reinvest it, I deleverage myself and I reinvest it, etc., etc. But it doesn't matter, all right? The whole thing about this is that, in my current financial situation, I don't have to worry about money. All right, that's the big benefit of making such a large amount of money. You know, I think that the big disconnect between a lot of people and making a lot of money is that they see making a lot of money as an opportunity to become an idiot. And that's not good. Okay, you shouldn't see money as an opportunity to become an idiot, because if you become an idiot, there is no light at the end of the tunnel. Legitimately, I mean, you will effectively go downhill your entire life and then you'll die poor. There is no amount of money that will save a person from becoming an idiot. All right, legitimately, it cannot happen. I mean, you know, and I've talked about, you know, in terms of like, you know, because the whole thing about personal finance is that in terms of personal finance, I am legitimately one of the best in the world at it. All right, you know, in terms of personal finance, like if I legitimately had nothing, let's say I had $5,000 and that was all I had, and I just left my farm and I went somewhere else in Central Texas, and you found me a year later, I would have effectively just started myself another cattle farm and just started making myself tremendous amounts of money. All right, it doesn't matter. Legitimately, it does not matter. And I talk about this in terms of a broader perspective. You know, one of the things about me that a lot of people probably don't understand, and I am looking to give you this perspective because I believe it is good. All right, I believe that it is good, because at the end of the day, I don't sell my soul to the devil for worthless things. I don't go on delusional journeys. I don't whatever. I don't do these ridiculous things, right? I legitimately don't have to worry about money at all. If I legitimately felt like leaving the cattle business, and I just liquidated all of my assets and I put the money in the S&P 500, and the S&P 500 made me 8% a year, and I went and fried chicken at Wingstop, I would effectively still make enough money to buy anything on the entire planet. That's the situation that I'm in, all right? And, but at the end of the day, why would I stop farming? Right? Why would I stop farming? I legitimately make so much money farming that I actually out-earned the entire planet just about in terms of individual earnings, right? Why would I stop farming? Why would I, right? I wouldn't. And so, that's the situation, right? I mean, it is what it is. I mean, when I take a look at it from an objective lens, I legitimately managed to make more money on a backyard farming commercial cattle, starting a commercial cattle business by myself, than anybody on the planet made doing just about anything. And it's by a massive margin. Massive margin. I mean, it's not funny, and it's not a joke, and I'm not being a prick about it. I am legitimately, it just is what, in terms of my reality, I legitimately do not have to worry about money at all. I don't worry about money at all. I don't have to. If I go to a restaurant, I can buy whatever I want. If I go to a grocery store, I can buy whatever I want. If I pay for all of my bills, it's about a 5 to 10% of the money that I make. All right, my business, legitimately, if I just take the money that my business makes and I put it back into my business grows by about 20% a month. 15, 20%, something like that. And in all honesty, when I use leverage, we're talking about 25 to 30%. Compounding. All right, it's not a flat rate of growth. It is a legit. It is a legitimate compounding growth effect. And just to put things in perspective, when I have 45 animals right now, and I do have one animal over there that's pretty extremely sick, but he's kind of teetering back and forth. If he starts to go downhill, I will say, I think that he's going downhill. But with these 45 animals, right? When I liquidate these 45 animals, I will effectively make enough money to buy like 80. And that will happen in the, and granted that, the animals that I have in the preconditioning pen right now, right? Those animals I purchased entirely with my own money from selling the animals that I had, right? I sold the animals that I had. I took the money and I invested the money, and then I bought those cattle. So I don't have any leverage on those animals, right? And over the next 3 months, when I liquidate these 30 animals, those animals in the preconditioning pen will have gone up in value, right? So, the amount of leverage that I have on my balance sheet will fall. If I wanted to leverage against them, I could do that as well. All right, I could do that as well. And so, I mean, you know, realistically, there are, you know, and I've talked about this. Like, if I legitimately wanted to hold on to cash, let's say that I felt like I needed some cash, right? Because sometimes it's just nice to just sit on some cash, because it's like, it's just good to know that, you know, you know, it's whatever, right? I can pay for whatever, you know. It's nice to sit on some cash. And so if I decided that I wanted to sit on some cash, I could still keep my business, you know, I could even expand my business and pull cash off my business. It wouldn't matter. I could just leverage against my balance sheet. I could put my balance sheet in a situation where the amount of debt that I have on my balance sheet is very low, right? And then I can just take the money that I'm paying myself on a monthly basis, pocket it, and then leverage against my balance sheet. All right, if I wanted to do that, if I felt like there was a need to do that, I could do that. But I'm not gonna, you know, I don't. Why would I do that? Maybe I do it for 1 month out of the year, but I'm not gonna do that like on a, you know, I'm not gonna run my business like that. That's not a good idea, right? Because then I'm gonna have to take a lot of leverage. Right, and you know, because you know, the whole idea of investing the capital is when I invest the money that I make, I am trading my money for an asset that is equally as valuable as the money, and the reason that I am doing that is to get a tax write-off. And then I knowledgeably appreciate the value of the asset. Right, and that's called an unrealized gain, and you do not pay taxes on unrealized gains. And at that point, I can pay myself whatever I believe I need. I can budget out the money, figure out what I should do with the capital, and then, you know, pay myself. Right, and in a realistic sense, I mean, if I just take the money that I make in my business and I put it back into my business grows by about 20% compounding every month. Over the next 3 months, over the next 2 to 3 months, I will genuinely, honestly make enough money from just liquidating my animals to expand the balance sheet by about 50%. And that would be with zero leverage. And if I did that with zero leverage, the amount of leverage that I have on my balance sheet will fall drastically, maybe to about 40%. And if the amount of leverage that I have on my balance sheet is 40%, you know, I would be willing to leverage for another 30%. Effectively, we're talking about, you know, like this business right here over the next month. From me just taking the money that I make in my business and putting it back into my business and leveraging against the earnings to keep the balance sheet at 70%, I would effectively have to buy something like 120 cattle. And that would be in the next 3 months. If I did that for the rest of the year, I will legitimately, you know, which I am looking to do, right? I've talked about this, the whole idea of what direction is my business going. I am looking to grow my business. I'm not looking to scrape money off my business or anything. I'm looking to just grow my business, right? You know, because the whole idea of scraping money off of a business is that if I intentionally went out of my way to spend money, for me to spend 8% of the money that I make, it would, you know, between now and the end of the year, let's just say that I do what I say I'm going to do, I would have to spend $80,000 for me to spend 1 month worth of money that I make. And what do I even do with that? Right? There's no way to really even spend that kind of money. You know, because if I intentionally went out of my way to spend 1 month worth of money, and so I leveraged it, I could buy, you know, I would have to buy like, I don't even know, like 10 Lamborghinis. All right, if I legitimately took the money and I intentionally said, you know what, I am intentionally going to spend 1 month worth of money every year. I'm going to do that. I intentionally am going to do that. And so I decided to leverage it. I would have to buy like 10 Lamborghinis. I don't, what do I even buy for $80,000 a year? You can't really even spend that kind of money. The only logical thing that I have come to the conclusion is the only logical thing that I can do making such a drastic amount of money is put it back into my business. But if I put it back into my business will legitimately compound growth about 20% a month. All right, I will legitimately have to buy something around 250 cattle in the next 6 months. And that would be me just running my business the way that it is, 70% leveraged, right? And, 70% leveraged and just growing my business. I would have to buy about 250, somewhere between 250 and 400 cattle by the end of the year. Right? That's why I'm also looking to buy myself a new piece of land. And just to put things in perspective, you know, this whole 10.5 acre field situation, if I sat here on this 10.5 acre field for the rest of my life, and I just said, you know, let's just say for the rest of the year, and I didn't grow my business at all, between now and in the next 6 months, I would have made over 150 grand cash in the next 6 months just off of this field. And that would be me just taking the money off of my business. You know, it will be over 150. You know, and I've said realistically, and I don't want to, you know, highball it. I don't want to, you know, estimate too high. But realistically, my income is around $40,000 a month take home pay right now. All right, so you know, even in the next 6 months, lowball estimate, I would have $150,000 cash. All right, you know, and I, you know, if I felt like sitting on a 10.5 acre field for the rest of my life and just doing this forever, I can always come back and do that. And realistically, even if I did that, I would still make enough money to do anything on the planet. It doesn't matter. The money is already negligible. The money's already negligible. It doesn't matter. If I legitimately went out and I said, you know what, I'm going to look to do better for myself. And then I went out and I did it and I felt like, oh, well, I just want to go back and farm 10.5 acre field. I want to farm 10.5 acres for the rest of my life and make 350, 500 grand a year. That's just what I want to do. You know, with $350,000, $500,000 a year, I'm just okay with that. And I just came back and started doing that. Then I could always come back and do it. And even then I would not have to worry about money. That, you know, it doesn't matter. All right, you know, it doesn't. Money's already, it's borderline negligible to me. It does not matter. Honest to God, if I legitimately just sat here for the next 6 months and only focused on this farm for the next 6 months, I would have over $150,000 cash left over. That's how much money my business would make me. That's how much I would pay myself. All right, you know, and even at that point, if I farmed a 10.5 acre field for the rest of my life, I would not have to worry about money, you know, forever. I could just farm 10.5 acres into eternity and just whatever. All right, and what am I going to do with the money? I'm going to grow my business. I'm not going to sit on a 10.5 acre field for the rest of my life. All right, you know, I've already decided. All right, you know, I'm going to go and do better things for myself. I'm going to look to do better for myself. I'm looking to challenge myself. And in a realistic sense, I mean, I'm not putting myself in some, you know, I'm not having some delusional fantasy. I'm not throwing a Hail Mary into the middle of nowhere. I make a massive amount of money. All right, in terms of a realistic perspective, I make enough money to buy anything on the entire planet, just about. And it wouldn't even matter. All right, anytime I go to a grocery store, I can buy whatever I want. I don't have to think about, oh, should I get the cheaper water? Should I get the more expensive water? I just grab whatever I want and I buy it. Legitimately, you know, when I pay for my bills, it's such a small fraction of my money that it doesn't even matter. All right, you know, my business grows by about 20% a month when I just take the money that I make in my business and put it back into my business. All right, you know, it honestly, it doesn't matter. All right, yeah. And if I felt like doing this for the rest of my life on a 10.5 acre field, I could always do that. But I've decided to do better for myself. Okay. And that's it for me today, YouTube. Y'all have a good one.